Hello and welcome to this Q&A from the Fertility Alliance. Today we're joined by Professor Allan Pacey and we're going to be talking about male fertility and what men can do that makes a difference. So Allan, thanks for joining us. I wanted to start by asking you, we hear an awful lot about what men should and shouldn't eat when it comes to fertility, but is there actually beyond eating a general healthy diet that really genuinely do make a difference?
Yeah, there's a lot of information about there about diet, isn't there? And I think people gravitate towards those kind of questions because it's the bit of our lives that we have control over, what we eat in the morning, noon, and night. I mean, there's broad brush data showing that men with healthy diets, and I'll come on to that, generally have better sperm than men that have poor diets. But that is a correlation. And we have to assume that if you change a diet from poor to good, that it would improve your fertility. And that experiment has never been done. But let's take it as read that that is the case. We all know that healthy is good and that we should be doing it for lots of reasons. Now, the data suggests that men who eat fresh fruit and vegetables, eat a Mediterranean diet, and don't eat processed meats and avoid vegetables is the bad end of the spectrum. So, I kind of think that we fundamentally know what is a healthy diet. Think about it, what it's like when you go on holiday, lots of salads, lots of fish, lots of fruit and vegetables. And I think that's as good as we could ask anyone to be, really. Whether it'll change your sperm quality, whether it will improve your fertility, I'm not sure, but it's probably where you should be.
So there aren't any secret male fertility superfoods that people ought to be knowing about.
No, not really. And that may lead us on to a discussion about supplements, because there's an awful lot of thing out there saying, take this supplement, it's got X, Y, and Z in it, it will improve your fertility. There have been some historic clinical trials showing that some supplements might make a slight difference, things like zinc and folic acid. I remember one study from 20 years ago, but there was a really big or two really big randomized controlled trials in the United States fairly recently that looked at the fertility outcomes of men that took supplements in comparison to those that didn't. And of course, they were randomized and they didn't know whether they were or they weren't. So you can control for everything else that they might subtly change in their lives. And actually, at the end of those studies, both of those studies show that you don't get any more babies. So you might get a little bit of an improvement in your semen quality, but that doesn't necessarily translate into success in terms of having a baby.
That's really interesting. What about smoking?
Yeah, I mean, smoking is not a good thing to do for all kinds of health reasons. There's mixed data on the effects of smoking. Most of the what we call meta-analyses suggest that smoking does impair semen quality. And we also know that it can kind of mess up the genetics of sperm. It can alter DNA fragmentation levels, for example. It can increase them. So I think for many reasons above and beyond fertility, that men should avoid smoking and should I would say, join a smoking cessation program if they're struggling to quit on their own. Um, that might lead us on to a conversation about vaping. Many men vape rather than smoke. There's not a lot of data on vaping, I have to say, and the jury is out. But my worry would be you are still potentially inhaling some chemicals that might affect your fertility. So I think my advice would be rather that men should stop altogether if they possibly can. Now, that leads us into a conversation about how long it takes to make a sperm. And it can take 3 months to make a sperm from start to finish. So if you quit smoking on a Friday, you're not going to see a change by Monday. But if you kind of quit in January, then we might begin to see some improvements by the end of March. And so any change like stopping smoking has to be sustained. And a cheeky cigar on Valentine's Day is going to undo all of the damage. So you can't kind of switch it on and switch it off. It's got to be a sustained change over a period of 3 months or more.
And when it comes to alcohol, should you stop that altogether too?
Yeah, the evidence is, I think, fairly clear that low levels of alcohol consumption within guidelines. So a glass of wine with your dinner every night, for example, is probably nothing to worry about. In fact, we did a study a few years ago looking at this across a cross section of 2,500 men in the UK, and we could find no evidence of moderate drinking on semen quality. We didn't follow to live birth. That's a slightly different question. So I'm not of the opinion that men should completely stop. The data, however, on binge drinking is clear. So you can drink within guidelines, but have all of your weekly allowance in one evening. That's not good. And therefore, one glass of wine or a glass of beer with your dinner is nothing to worry about. But going out on a Friday night with the lads and getting absolutely blotto is not a good thing to do and should be avoided.
And what about being overweight? Is that going to cause problems?
Yeah, there's general correlations with increasing body mass index and poor sperm quality. Of course, if you're a little bit overweight, then other things change in your body. You change your hormonal balance. You might have more estrogen circulating around. That has an impact on fertility. It can also lead to inadvertent warming of the testicles. So if you are a little bit overweight and you're carrying a bit of excess fat down there, then your testicles can get warm simply, or warmer than they should, simply by the fact that they're closer to bits of your body than they otherwise would normally be. So I would urge any man to try and lose weight if they are of a higher BMI. And again, that may be something that is difficult to do. And I would seek the advice of a professional to help with, dietary advice and exercise.
When it comes to heat, are there other things that you should avoid? We hear a lot about heat and sperm. I mean, what are the key things that men should and shouldn't do to stop that causing problems?
Well, the testicles are hanging outside the body in the scrotum for a reason, and that's to keep them about 2.5 degrees cooler than body temperature. So really anything that inadvertently heats the testicles is potentially harmful. And there are a lot of studies on experimental animals showing this, and there's some data from the human as well to support that theory. So again, we did a study a few years ago now looking at lifestyle factors in UK men. And we discovered that men that wore tight underwear had significantly lower sperm quality than men who wore loose underwear. Now, we didn't measure the temperature. We're assuming that the tight underwear wearers had higher testicular temperature, but that does illustrate a potential effect. And that effect would extend, I think, to skinny jeans. I don't think they're in fashion anymore now, but when they were, that would be a risk. And I think that would also extend to people that spend a long time in a hot bath. So I'm an advocate of showering rather than having a bath, and I would avoid the sauna for, again, that 3 month window when sperm is being produced.
And are there any types of exercise people should avoid? We hear a lot about the potential cycling problems. Is that the case?
There was a lot of debate in the cycling literature a few years ago about the effects of cycling on fertility. I think that was partly because of tight lycra, akin to tight underwear, but I think also spending many hours in the saddle, your testicles are getting a bit of a knocking and a bit of a bruising if you're someone that cycles a lot. So I think we have to kind of put it into perspective. If you are doing tens of kilometers on the saddle a day as part of a triathlon or something like that, then I can begin to see how cycling may have an effect through those mechanisms. There's also other mechanisms to consider, because if you're putting your body on the edge in an extreme way like that, then again, that can have its own impacts on testicular function. But I think if you go into the shops for a loaf of bread twice a week and it's half a kilometer down the road, I think I'd probably err on the side of the fact that that exercise is good for you in a general way. So it's a case of getting the balance right. I don't think there's much evidence to suggest that cyclists are any more likely to have infertility than cyclists. But I think I would err on the side of caution if you are in that kind of triathlon kind of end of the spectrum. And again, remember that 3 month window.
And what about stress? Does that make a difference?
Yeah, stress is an interesting one because it probably has more of an impact on sexual function and sexual performance and sexual frequency. So there's an interesting kind of interplay with psychology and what I've heard a lot over the years is that in couples trying to conceive, having intercourse becomes more of a chore than a pleasure. And of course, if people stop or reduce the frequency of intercourse, then they're reducing their probability of spontaneous conception. And I think stress can come in through many ways, work related stress, overworking, not being at home, or stress within the relationship can both kind of impact on that reality. So I think stress can have a role. I don't necessarily think it's having an effect directly on the testicles in terms of how many sperm might be being produced, but I think it can certainly affect couple dynamics, and that will have an impact on fertility because people are simply not spending enough time in the bedroom.
Another thing that people are asking a lot about now is whether they should have any extra tests beyond the kind of standard ones that are offered in the clinic. I mean, should most people be doing extra testing, do you think?
Well, NICE as an organization have a guideline that suggests what tests should or shouldn't be done. And the primary tests for men are to have a sample of semen analyzed in a specialist laboratory, because that can detect many problems very quickly that we might want to worry about and therefore try and treat through assisted reproduction usually. There are some hormonal tests which are important, and there are some genetic tests which are also important in certain circumstances. Now, there are some tests out there, and I'm going to name one. I'm going to name DNA fragmentation testing. It's been around for a long time. The jury is really out as to whether that has any benefit or not to an individual couple. There are certainly correlations with reproductive outcomes. So, in people with high levels of DNA fragmentation, there does seem to be lower levels of fertility. The question in my mind is whether, knowing that you have high levels of DNA fragmentation, whether you can do anything about it over and above simply trying another cycle of IVF or ICSI, for example. And I think that is where the jury is out. Often these tests are come at a cost. People are paying out of their own money. You're not going to get them on the NHS. So it's generally tests that happen within the private sector. And I think the question to ask the doctor in front of you is, what will the result of this test alter in my treatment? And if the answer is it won't, then I think you need to think, could that money be sensibly used to put forward for another cycle of IVF, rather than doing the test and then not knowing what to do with the results? So I would be very cautious about paying money for additional tests, because I'm really not sure the evidence is there to support their use.
With all the things you've been talking about, are they things that can make a difference if you've actually already got a fertility problem, or are they just things that might improve things generally and improve your chances of success? I mean, can they actually make a difference to men who already know that there's something that's less than optimal?
I think it's a case of thinking about risks, really. So, the testicles, you have the size of testicles that you have as a man, and they can produce a certain number of sperm per unit time. We don't have any way of improving that efficiency, but we do things in our lives that can impact on the quality of those sperm that come off the production line. So it's a little bit like a team sport, really, in that you can alter the way the game is played in subtle ways that collectively might have a bigger impact. And so, being that bit healthy, reducing alcohol consumption a little bit, being that bit more active, reducing your BMI are the kinds of things that kind of might well add up in small ways to actually help your sperm quality improve, and there give you that edge when it comes either to natural conception or to assisted reproduction. Now, the problem is we haven't got any studies that we can point to that say that is fact and reality. That is an aged professor now hypothesizing about the potential impact that it will have. But I think it's sensible in my mind to suggest that people should try and reduce the risks as much as possible without getting stressed, without feeling guilty, and hoping that it will improve sperm quality that little bit and just improving your chances that little bit more.
Professor Allan Pacey, thank you so much. That was really informative and really interesting. So thank you for joining us.